Tashidale. Now we move to the second training of the path of Tantra meditation. As I mentioned before, we move into the three types of practices within the tradition. We start with the preliminary practices, then we will do the generation stage, and then we will do the completion stage. So we actually have a lot of practices here. The book that we are using, Natural Liberation, really talks about many of these practices. The core of the book is about these practices as well as Dzogchen. And so we will get to those over a period of time. So this is the most significant part of the entire path of Tantra and the entire book of Natural Liberation. So we will begin with the preliminary practices of Nundro. So I wanted to give you a brief introduction to that before we get to the first actual practice here today. And so I wanted to mention that the importance of these preliminary practices called Nundro, and they are really the foundation of everything that follows. So they're very, very important. And in fact, some say that this is really all that's absolutely necessary to achieve enlightenment. You can achieve enlightenment with these practices alone. That's how important that they are. And they really become the foundation. Now, when we talk about them as important, these oftentimes were taught by the lamas, requiring 100,000 repetitions of these, particularly the second set, divided into two parts. And so the second part or set of these that we will talk about, they would require 100,000 repetitions, perhaps as a way of testing whether someone was really serious about doing these practices. If you're serious about it, then you would go ahead and you would not question, not doubt, you would go ahead and do these practices, these repetitions. So a real test of commitment, if you will. In fact, some lamas went and expanded that to requiring 400,000 repetitions, almost 500,000. That takes a strong commitment, a lot of time to be able to do that practice. But that's fairly rare today that they would practice that many. But 100,000 is actually fairly common. And so the practices are normally done by ordained monks and nuns after they've gone through a number of years of practice or teachings. Then they do a 3-year retreat. And it's having done that 3-year retreat that then they become a designated lama. And they can go ahead and teach others. And so it's usually done as the first part of that 3-year retreat. And I've heard some say it takes as little as 3 months, but more commonly it takes 6 to 9 months to complete those practices during that first part of the retreat. So that can be a challenge for a lot of us as lay practitioners with our other time commitments and so forth to do that. If we did, for example, only 10 of these each day, it would take us 30 years to complete these preliminary practices. So that's quite a while. If we were able to up it a little bit and do 100 of them a day, that would cut it down to 3 years, but that's still a fairly significant practice. But not all lamas require their students to do 100,000 of each of these. In fact, they often will do it in terms of a period of time. For example, one of my teachers said that you can do this as your main practice for a period of 1 year. So that is another approach, a period of time. Another approach is based on the achievement, the accomplishment that you have during that time. So based on the level of realization, your commitment, and so forth, that becomes the evidence for that. Padmasambhava, in our book Natural Liberation, talks about it in terms of 3 days. So one of the reasons that I like this particular text for lay practitioners is exactly that. But then we don't just stop after 3 days. There is a short version, and we'll use one that was written by His Holiness Dudjom Rinpoche, adapted just slightly, but that we will use for a daily practice. So we do a short daily practice prior to doing then any of the other practices, the other meditations that we are going to do for that day. And so we do it, each of them, for a period of 3 days. But then we also continue to do them on a daily basis, okay, for the rest of our life, if you will. So that will be the approach that we're using here, which is a very compatible approach for us as lay practitioners. So the first set, I mentioned these are divided into two parts. We have what are called the common nundro, and the other name for this is the four thoughts that turn the mind. And then the other set of them is the uncommon nundro, and we will take a look at those as well. Just an overview, the common nundro includes 4 parts. The 4 parts are the suffering of samsara, the precious human life, impermanence and death, and karma and reincarnation. So those are the 4. And in the uncommon nundro, when we look at those look at the practices of refuge and bodhicitta. Sometimes those are combined together, so you may have 4, you may have 5, depending on whether they are combined or not. And then we will do it in a combined manner. And then we have an purification, Vajrasattva purification, and an offering mandala that we do. So we then make an offering. And then finally Guru Yoga. So those will be the parts of that. So now, looking again at the common nundro, the 4 thoughts that turn the mind. The basic idea of the 4 thoughts that turn the mind is to provide a way of motivating us to do the practice. So the idea here is to look at things in a way that give us an incentive to say to ourselves, yes, I really do need to do this practice. Okay? So we'll take a look at them. Though they're a little bit fear-based in some ways, they do help us in terms of contemplating these thoughts and understanding them as fundamental to the basic practices of the Tantra as well. And so we gain some basic understanding and experience that also then helps us with the more advanced practices. So the first one is suffering, the suffering of samsara. Now we talked fairly extensively about this in the first part of the course when we were talking about the Buddha, his teachings, and some of the basic principles associated with this. Of course, the first noble truth is suffering, and so the source of the problem that we have of not being enlightened is the suffering of samsara. And so we've already addressed that fairly significantly. There's different approaches to that. For example, the Buddha talked about old age, sickness, birth, old age, sickness, and death, for example, as 4 forms of suffering. We talked about the 3 sufferings, the suffering of suffering, including the physical pain and mental anguish versions, the suffering of change, and the change and how that can lead to stress in our lives and so forth. Or the all-encompassing suffering, and that suffering, or all-pervasive suffering, the more subtle form of suffering that we sometimes experience, the imperfection, if you will, in life. So those 2 are forms of suffering, and we've talked about those previously, so we're not going to go into those in detail at this point, but focus instead here on the practice. And leading into that, I'd also then like to read the section from the root text here, the preliminary practices for subduing your own mind stream, which begins on page 13 of the Natural Liberation text. So if you want to read along, you can turn to that page as well. With faith and devotion, I mentally bow to the Dharmakaya, the original Lord Samantabhadra. So Samantabhadra is a personification of the ultimate. The Sambhogakaya, the victorious, peaceful, and wrathful deities. In the Bardos, in the practice called the Shitro, we talk about the 100 peaceful and wrathful deities. So that's what's being referred to here. And to the Nimanakaya, Padmasambhava, The Nirmanakaya is the physical form of the Buddha, so Shakyamuni Buddha was the first of those, the first Buddha, and Tibetans often consider Padmasambhava to also have been the second Buddha. So the Nirmanakaya is the Padmasambhava here. So with faith and devotion, bowing down to each of these, the Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Nirmanakaya forms. Continuing on page 15 here, due to the power of prayers, the experiential instructions on the transitional processes are revealed for the sake of disciples who are training their mind streams. In this, there are the preliminary practices, the main practice, and the conclusion. And there are gradual instructions in the preliminary practices will be clearly presented for those of inferior intelligence. That's all of us, the inferior intelligence, with the introduction and practice in accord with the Guru's instruction. So here he then gives an overview. Here the subject is taught in terms of 6 general topics. Now I listed 8, which I'll comment on here briefly, but pondering the sufferings of cyclic existence, the difficulty of obtaining human life of leisure and endowment, and meditating on death and impermanence are the preliminary practices for subduing your own mind stream. So he listed 3. What's missing? Karma and reincarnation. And what we will see is he's made a reference, an inference to this, but we will break it out, and I've added in an additional practice to include a complete set of the 4. He continues, the preliminary practices for training your own mind stream include Guru Yoga, the 100-syllable mantra, that's the Vajrasattva mantra, and finally, the spiritual activity of offering the mandala. And what is missing here is refuge and bodhicitta. So I have added that in as well so that we have a complete set of 4 in those set of teachings. So then he begins the actual first of the 4 thoughts that turn the mind, looking at the sufferings of cyclic existence. So if you do not ponder the sufferings of cyclic existence, delusionment with the cycle of existence will not arise. So pondering these, we become disillusioned with the way things are. So again, that's the motivation. If disillusionment with the cycle of existence does not arise, whatever dharma you practice, it cannot be disengaged from this life. And the craving and attachment of this life are not severed. So we need to sever the attachment. Thus, pondering the sufferings of the cycle of existence is extremely important. And then he continues on page 17. First, go by yourself to a place that arouses disillusionment. If possible, go to a deserted place, broken down ruins, a field of dried grass rustling in the wind, or an eerie place. Or else go where there are pathetic, ill people, beggars, and so on, who were previously prosperous and later fell in hard times. And we have lots of those places around today in this economic times. If that is not possible, go by yourself to a place of solitude. You know, a place of solitude, of course, can be inside as well. Other teachings I have had on this refer to a place of a cemetery or charnel grounds. And of course, we have rather pristine cemeteries here. Generally speaking, the charnel grounds, there would have been dead bodies. There would have been animals feeding on those dead bodies and so forth. A pretty scary kind of place. So we can visualize, we can imagine a scary place as well. Continuing on here, in terms of your posture, sit on a comfortable cushion with one leg folded, plant your right foot on the ground, press your left leg against the ground, rest your right elbow on your right knee, press your palm against your right cheek, and clasp your left knee with your left palm. This is the posture of despair that will lead to stark depression. So what we're doing is sitting like a cross-legged posture. This is very much resembles the posture of green Tara, if you're familiar with that. You're in a cross-legged posture, except that your right leg is extended a little bit. And then you bring your knee up in this particular one and place your elbow on your knee and your hand on your cheek, like this. And it's sometimes referred to as the posture of Milarepa. Or you can place it behind the right ear, but then we're getting more into the posture of Marpa, the translator. But place it on your cheek or behind your ear, whatever's comfortable, with your elbow on your knee. So cross-legged, with the right knee up, and the foot extended a little bit, and the elbow on the knee and against our cheek. So that's the posture. Continuing on then with your mind, ponder the sufferings of the cycle of existence. And with your speech, occasionally utter these words, letting them arouse your mindfulness. So here are the literal words. I have them in the actual practice for you there. The handout practice, or something very similar here. Alas, alas, wretched me, the cycle of existence is suffering. Nirvana is joy. So ponder in this way. You think, oh dear, I am trapped in the sufferings of the cycle of existence, which is like a fire pit, and I am afraid. Now is the time has come to escape from within this life. This suffering of the three miserable states of existence is impossible to endure, and it is limitless. Occasions of joy do not occur even for a moment. Now is the time to prepare for a quick escape. So that is the visualization, the words that we use, which we state out loud as a part of that. Then imagine this, the second part of the practice. This cycle of existence is a great fire pit of intense heat. It is deep, broad, and high. In such a terrifying fire pit, I cry out as I am trapped together with every other sentient being in cyclic existence. Verbally express this ardently with the grieving voice. Oh dear, I'm afraid in this great fire pit of the cycle of existence. Since beginningless time, I am still burning and I am afraid. While you are uttering these words of lament, in the space above that pit, imagine your primary spiritual mentor, and this could be your teacher, your Lama. If you don't have a primary spiritual mentor, imagine Padmasambhava, who's the universal teacher of all beings, whose body is adorned with the 6 types of bone ornaments, who holds in his hand a hook of light rays. Imagine him saying this to you, alas, the joyless cycle of existence is like a fire pit. Now the time has come to escape from it. The sufferings of the 3 miserable states of existence are limitless, and occasions of joy do not occur for even a moment. Now is the time to escape from the pit of fire. Simply hearing these words, the thought arises, alas, long I have been trapped in the fire pit of the sufferings of the cycle of existence. Now, heeding the words of my spiritual mentor, I shall escape from this. I shall also liberate one of these sentient beings, every one of these sentient beings. So remembering our Bodhisattva commitment here. As soon as you sincerely bring forth the spirit of awakening, imagine that you are caught by your heart with the hook of your mentor's hand, and you are instantly liberated into the realm of Sukhavati, a Buddha field. Instantly, a hook of light rays appears in your hand as well, and by one, you save every sentient being from the fire pit. Earnestly cultivate compassion for all sentient beings in the cycle of existence. And continuing on with the reading then, in the indented section on page 19, continually reflect in that way in the fire pit of the cycle of existence and ponder all the sufferings of the cycle of existence. Day and night, bear this in mind without being distracted. A sutra states, joy is ever present on the tip of the needle of the cycle of is never present on the tip of the needle of the cycle of existence. Thus meditate on the problems of the cycle of existence until disillusionment arises. Once your mind has turned away from the cycle of existence on which you have been meditating, you will ascertain the need for Dharma, and meditative experience will arise as there is no craving for this life. So that would be the experiential version of what we're looking for here. And then concluding, if your mind does not turn away from the cycle of existence, meditation is pointless. Meditate on this for 3 days and then return. So here he's saying we only need to meditate on this for a period of 3 days. By meditating on this for the time being, your mind will withdraw from the cycle of existence and ultimately it will ascend to nirvana. Practice this. And then he concludes by saying the meditation on the sufferings of the cycle of existence is the first session in the natural liberation through contemplating experiential instructions on the transitional process. So this is the practice here that we are doing for this one. And so there is a handout describing the actual practice. So if you will turn to that, the practice 11, the suffering of samsara. We'll go through that very briefly. We begin by setting our intention. And then we take refuge, which we do for 3 times, reciting the refuge prayer. Sit in shamatha briefly to establish a sense of emptiness, without thoughts. We always begin with that. And then for body, speech, and mind, remember he talked about each of those. The first in the Milarepa posture, that's the body part. Fold the left leg in, keep the right knee up with our elbow on the knee, and then the right hand at our ear or cheek, and think this posture of despair will lead to stark depression. And then for speech, we lament samsara is suffering, nirvana is happiness. So we contemplate that and periodically repeat that again. And then with our mind, we ponder the sufferings of cyclic existence. So we imagine all of existence is a terrifying fire pit. We're in this fire pit. And we're caught in it. All are on fire and burning. So the pain and the suffering associated with this. And develop a sense of renunciation of samsara and a desire to practice to be liberated from this suffering. So that's the mental contemplation that we do with this. And then after we've done that for a period and we really do not want to be in this fire pit of samsara any longer, then we imagine our spiritual guide appears before us as a body of light, and he says, samsara is like a fire pit, many are suffering, please come, I will take you from samsara. So light comes out from his head to our heart and lifts us up out of the fire pit. But we look back and see the suffering of all of these other beings, our mothers, our friends, and so forth, and feel great compassion. So light radiates out of our heart, and we bring them along one by one until all of them, all sentient beings, are then again with us out of the fire pit. In the Buddha realm of Sukhavati. Okay. So in a pure Buddha realm. Then we dedicate the merit again, repeating that 3 times. And then we make everything meditation. As we get up off the cushion, we continually reflect on these sufferings day and night until disillusionment arises and you really feel the need for samsara. So that is practice 11. We will be doing 2 practices for this session. So the next practice is precious human life.